All right, so I've talked about what the iPad, along with mobile tech in general, can do, but when, how, and why should you use it in your process? This is a completely fair and valid question just because there's a lot of innovation happening in the space, but that's going to kind of like lead it to a general sort of plateau, and that will force one of the major players to really make a move that will advance it beyond the point of no return. Right now, mobile tech is still very much mobile, and we want it to get more powerful, but once it gets more powerful, it's going to completely change the landscape. And I think right now, there's kind of a fear to push it past that point. And we're not quite there yet, but I notice that people tend to get caught up in what's next, that they might sort of miss what's available right now and what's doable right now. When having a discussion about creative tools, you kind of have to keep into perspective what certain things are meant for. And also when you're making an investment, that will also factor in the decision-making process. That way your purchase doesn't become obsolete right after a year. I see a lot of opinions on this topic, especially a lot since I dropped that video on what you can create with the iPad. So I kind of want to jump in here and talk about what mobile tech is really meant for, where it's going, and in the process, hopefully clear up some common misconceptions and even answer some questions that might be lingering for anyone who's thinking about jumping into the game. So the iPad can do a lot, as I mentioned before, when it comes to digital art, music production, and video editing and layering. More than I think people realize, it's really easy to leverage the power of different apps in use with one another. Easy to learn too, and having hands-on functionality is completely underrated, I think. If you're going for a touch experience, this is one of the best things you could really use. We're talking about things like the Surface, Surface Book, Surface Pro, other touch screens and things like that. What you're running into is you're running into fully fledged desktop solutions, and that is great for certain people, but it can also come with a lot of hiccups because now it's not as plug and play. So if that's something that's necessary for you in order to be able to work within that ecosystem, obviously go with something like that. But if you're wanting something that's really portable and can do a lot of stuff without having to be tethered to that desktop workflow, then the iPad really makes a lot of sense. So when are you going to use this? Well, aside from using it at home, you're going to be using it out at the park, at the cafe, in the city. And I think the fact that you don't have to sacrifice a lot of power for the portability is one of the main selling points. When it comes to creative and professional workflow, how you're using this is really going to be an important factor. It's going to come down to whether or not you're using this for like personal kind of use to sketch some ideas, come up with some different things on the fly, or if you're going to be using this as your main primary driver for creating high-end material. And this is where lines can get really blurry, because when it comes to those creative solutions, the iPad has a lot of strength in certain areas and a lot of weaknesses in the others. So it's really going to be dependent on what you're trying to go into this for. If digital art is your jam, you really can't go wrong with this thing. There are a lot of high-end solutions that encourage creativity, and you can import brushes from the desktop onto this thing if you have specific brushes you like to use. Also can export things as PSDs, so you can kind of have that kind of seamless workflow with the computer. If music production is your thing, then you have a lot of really interesting options, but you're also going to run into a lot of limitations there. So this thing is best kind of thought of as like a portable drum machine or a portable music making solution, similar to what the MPC was when it first came out, right? And kind of what the MPC currently is with things like the MPC Live and the MPC X. Mind you, the iPad already kind of had that power before the MPC Live and X came out, and I almost wonder if those things were made as a response to just how useful the iPad was becoming for music production. Where you run into limitations is if you're trying to do a lot of live performance and things, you're limited to the CPU when you're talking about the power of the music production, because you can only have a certain amount of tracks depending on what type of device you have when it comes to the iPad, and the more storage and the more RAM that you have, the more powerful it'll be and the more tracks and layers of different sounds you can have. But you're still limited to the amount of effects and things that you can stack when you're in music making programs. And you're going to run into similar power constraints and limitations when you're going into video editing as well, because video editing isn't as powerful as it is on the computer with certain things, but there are exceptions, and that's not necessarily a weakness. Video editing on the computer, it can have more misses than hits, because since you have so many features, you have so many different plugins, so many different options, and you're doing all these things at once, it sometimes can't keep up depending on what your hardware is, and it can be really slow. It still takes a while to like really jump into it if you're just trying to create something simple. And if you're on the go, not having to load clips is really helpful, especially for when you're creating 4K video, because you can edit 4K video on this thing easily, like so seamlessly, and it's super fast, and you can have multiple layers of video tracks in projects like LumaFusion. And you can also create video effects and things on this thing too. Where you run into issues is because you don't have a dedicated GPU on something like this, you're not going to have the ability to go as far as you want with those video edits, depending on what you're trying to make, unless you get really resourceful and you start thinking about what you want to do with your material in a way that kind of solves problems, and you're not going to have the ability to seamlessly pull something in from one app into the other without having to export. So these are things that if you're trying to create like high-end, intense 3D renders and things, obviously you can't do that here, but you can do professional level material on this thing. And I find that making video material for YouTube and for Instagram and stuff like that is just really easy to do in the mobile platform, because since it's simpler, things aren't getting in my way and I'm actually able to work really quickly. And it's only going to get better because new updates keep increasing the functionality. Okay, so why? Why even use the iPad Pro? Well, first of all, the price isn't exactly the cheapest, but once you pay for the iPad, suddenly the apps are really cheap and you can just kind of keep everything focused on one device. And it will last well simply because it has a larger body, which means that unlike the iPhone, which seems to kind of just continuously deteriorate since it's having to pack so much in this super thin sort of package, it really can't handle all the things you're throwing at it for a long period of time. It's really weird how close they are in price, considering what you're getting. I personally value the bigger screen and the fact that there are more apps available and that I can do more creatively. The fact that I don't have to pay that much more to get that, I'm probably gonna go with that. And it's probably gonna be more worth my while in comparison to something like the iPhone, where there's not as much innovation happening there. And there are two big reasons I would recommend the iPad to anyone looking to jump into creative fields. And the first one is that it's just easy to get your foot in the door if you're a newcomer and you wanna learn how to make this stuff. This is something I've touched on before, but I think that's just massively underrated. Like being able to kind of jump in with low consequence. Because like if you invest all your money in this like high-end desktop rig, what if you hate that and then you're stuck with it because unless you're going to return it or something. Once you make that decision, you can't really necessarily undo it. Same goes for a laptop, because you have all that power packed in a portable form factor, it's going to be more expensive, and then you're still taking a very big risk on if that's something you're interested in. Because then once you get that, then you have to start thinking about software, and software is much more expensive. When we talk about something like the iPad, if you're not necessarily into that stuff, maybe you'll find something else that you're really into. A good example of what I'm talking about is, let's say you want to get into music production. It might make sense to get something like the iPad and dive into something like BeatMaker 3, which is like 25-ish bucks, and you can see if you really like the workflow, whether that's messing around with the pads or using pattern editing. That might be easier than rushing out and buying a giant piece of hardware or a piece of software that's really pricey, and then they're like, wait a minute, I'm not into this. And on the iPad, if you're not really feeling music production, you could instantly switch over to digital art for very low cost. And if they're not feeling the digital art stuff, they can easily switch over to LumaFusion for like $20 and really kind of start to learn video editing, learn what different functions serve, and learn how to make clean cuts, keyframe, and color grade, all in like one seamless package with 4K footage. Then if you do want to jump into a computer-based editing workflow and really take your work to the next level, you will now have a better idea of what is required, what you're getting into, and you also will know how to do it. I think the iPad as a learning tool is so valuable. Part of how I learned to do anything that I do creatively was by messing around on mobile years ago on the iPhone. And that's something that I am so glad that I had the opportunity to do, because I was really able to see like how different things worked with a very low initial cost. And I would not trade that for anything. So then on the flip side, let's say you are super experienced in what you're doing, and maybe you're someone like me who just gets super annoyed at all of these things getting in the way of the creative process. Coming to the iPad and creating stuff has been such a great refreshing thing for me, because I'm really able to focus on what I'm making. If you're someone that's looking for a great way to sketch ideas and also create fully fledged things in your field, if it's doable, having the ability to just kind of like zone out and hone in on what you're making without having to worry about all of these different things getting in the way, I think that's huge for any creator, especially creators that are looking to make stuff consistently on the fly, share stuff online, and kind of get ideas out there faster in front of people. The iPad is limited, and that is the biggest motivator for me because there's a lot of potential for innovation there. Because jumping into popular desktop applications means that things have already been done, and I'm inevitably not going to be as good as those people at doing those certain things. And the process is huge in inspiring what I create. So having a tool that offers new challenges actually, I think, motivates me to create better material and to come up with new ways to create different things. I'm able to take what I learned mobile, bring it to the desktop, and then figure out if there's something on the desktop that I want to achieve on mobile, and then actually learn to get there. And it's definitely going in an interesting place, but I think the conversation right now is what will happen when the inevitable fusion of the sort of web experience hits with mobile. Because then when that happens, will we even be talking about like how cool it is to make stuff mobile? I don't really know. I was someone that was saying for a long time that that integration would happen. So then iPad OS kind of gets announced and it's like, oh, we're one step closer. It's still down the line from that, but then once that hits, yes, things will be different and we won't probably be talking about mobile the same way we do now. That's really neither here nor there to me, honestly, because I think it's a matter of what you need to do right in this instance. Ultimately, it comes down to what you want to use this for, and at what level do you want to use this at? What kind of challenges and maybe drawbacks are you willing to deal with? And also, what are the advantages that exist here over desktop? How will those best serve you in your process? If you're looking to get into different creative fields, you cannot go wrong with the iPad Pro, and I fully recommend it. And if you're someone that already has the top of the line gear and you're wanting something that is simpler and more streamlined and doesn't get in your way when it comes to creating different material, I would say it is one of the best all-in-one solutions you could be looking at. Maybe you're in the middle and you want something that's super powerful and you want that portability, but you just don't think that the iPad can really accomplish that. Obviously, laptops are way more powerful now, and they're starting to make even more sense for this kind of thing, as you're talking like you got higher end graphics cards and those things. But I would still not sleep on the iPad because I think that the iPad Pro has a lot of hidden strength. I actually only have the 2017 iPad Pro, and I have 500 gigs of RAM, and it has really served me well in ways that I just couldn't have really imagined if I hadn't gotten it. I'm a firm believer that you can make anything with whatever you have. It is all up to your imagination and getting creative with what you have in those different fields. That can be really great for people who are learning, and I think they can also be a great inspiring way to really get back to a place where you're falling in love with what you're making. If you're someone like me and you can kind of fall out of love with it regularly, it's definitely a constant battle to renew my interest and passion in this stuff, because when there are highs, there are highs, and then when there are lows, there are serious lows. Having something that encourages me to make stuff and gets me to want to do it after I've spent a whole day of creating stuff anyway is something that I think is just immensely valuable for me. Whatever allows you to be the most creative, go for that. If it's something like the computer, cool. If it's something like a Cintiq tablet used with a computer, cool. If it's something like the iPhone, go for that. And if it's something like the iPad Pro, you can't go wrong there. If you're interested in seeing what the iPad can do, I highly recommend checking out my video on what you can create with the different apps on the iPad Pro, because before then I felt like most of the people that would talk about the iPad a lot of times were people that were outsiders looking in, and I didn't really feel like we had tons of sort of insider, enthusiast perspectives. So I wanted to show the different and weird, unusual ways it can be used in that video. So definitely check that out if you're interested. And I wanted to make this video to serve as kind of a companion to that video, because while I talked about what you can do, I didn't really talk a lot about why anyone should do stuff with it. I hope that this video was helpful if you're considering getting the iPad Pro and using it in your creative process. So if you have one, definitely let me know what you think of it. If you're interested, also let me know. Definitely let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. I would love to hear what you're thinking of this, because there's so many thoughts around it since it's still pretty early in the growth process, oddly enough, even though this thing's been out for a while. Definitely have a lot more to say about each individual app, and so I'm going to be diving into those soon. So if you're interested, stick around for that. And that's it for now. So thanks so much for watching, y'all, and I will see y'all later.